Roundtable Discussion. Our topic is Cybersecurity Incident and Breach Reporting in the Firms. Let's welcome our speakers on the stage. As I call out your name, please assemble. I'd like to welcome Seuleiman-Morgan, Chief Legal and Compliance Officer, Airtel Mobile Commerce, followed by Sebina Noreen Malik, working with AJames Solicitors. That's you. Please. Looking forward for your panel. Joining is Mohammed Absri Afra.
He's not coming. Yeah.
Then
he's not joining.
Who's coming?
Hossam Zakaria.
All right, let's welcome Mr. Hossam, Zakaria, Esmaeil.
He's a prime legal counsel.
He's a prime legal counsel for Cihan and the CFO HZ Legal Services in Hossam Zakaria for legal consultations and legal services.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. We really do appreciate your participation up until this time. My name's Sebina. I'm a lawyer based in the UK. I have a quote by Warren Buffett, a business magnate based in America, who said, "It takes 20 years to build your reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it." And never have those words been more pertinent since the pandemic. 40% of law firms since the pandemic do not know whether they actually have breached cybersecurity laws at all. 75% of law firms were targeted by cyber criminals, which we will call hacktivists. And approximately £4 million worth of client money was stolen from client accounts in solicitor firms. So how many of you actually do believe that your law firms are fully compliant with regards to cybersecurity, which is a hot topic, because your client is your gold mine. It's what is generating your money in your firms. And so our panel today are going to discuss these security issues with you in a lot more detail. It's going to be a very interactive session, so we won't be speaking to you. We will ask you to involve yourselves with us. At any point you have any questions, please do raise your hands. You do not need to wait until the end. As I say, it is going to be an interactive session. And with that said, I'm going to let Mohammed and Cihan introduce themselves, and we'll let the session begin. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start. Thank you, Sebina. I personally don't believe the law firm are compliant, but we'll chat about it. So my name is Cihan Seuleiman-Morgan. I am the Chief Legal Compliance Officer for, as you can see, for Airtel Money. We're basically a fintech branch of one of the leading telco in Africa. We operate in 14 countries. So my approach for today's discussion really is going to be from a banking, payment service provider, and e-money issuer perspective. Simply because, first, of the jurisdiction where we operate, there is a lot of risk. Secondly, because of the industry, banking and the financial services. So that's going to be the approach. Personally, I'm a lawyer by profession. I started my career in diplomacy, and then I suppose I was maybe a bit too efficient for the public sector, so I moved into construction law. I was based in South Africa for about 9 years. Then I moved to Kenya for Airtel Africa for about 6 years, and recently to Dubai, also for the same company. So very happy to be here, and Hossam, over to you.
Okay. When I was studying the cybersecurity in one of my days, my father is a lawyer. He saw whatever I'm doing for AI, cybersecurity, whatever for technology, laws, and things like that. He came one day and told me, wow, where is that days when the barbarian was attacking to hostage someone, and we called the SWAT, so they will attack him to finish that. Where are those? How would this technology has become like that? So I told them, anyway, cybersecurity and the cybercrime is the most dangerous real threat which we are facing in real life, because in cyber crimes, it's considered like a virtual hostage from different way to different way. You don't have to be in the physically exist where you have to do the crime like before. So my father was surprising how that is attacking and how that damaging our reputations and how you can protect it, because You know, the hackers nowadays don't need to be intelligent, don't have the cost. Most of the cost which we have to bear is to defend against them and the anti-hacking them and how to defend yours always. So anyway, that will be the sessions which we are talking about. I will be speaking it from the legal wise, how to define it, how we are using it in the legal wise, and my colleague will be handling it from different angles of data security also for bankers and from the experience of UK view. Please.
Thank you so much for that introduction, both of you. From a UK perspective, I just gave you some statistics at the beginning. The problem we have is during the pandemic, all of a sudden, employees were asked to work from home. The firms didn't have security in place, and possibly they still don't have vigilant security in place. So, for example, encryption, two-factor authentication, ensuring that employees don't download software that's going to bring viruses in, that they may accidentally click onto phishing scam, the spam mail. There are many instances where IT within a firm are not in themselves trained fully in order to then train forward with the employees. So it's very important that your policies and your procedures are up to date, that you ensure that you are providing the right training to your staff, and that doesn't mean that they just do a one-off course. What you've got to ensure is that you give them bite-sized chunks so that along the way they're absorbing the information, they're retaining the information, and then of course you've got new starters at all times, and you've got to ensure that the policies and procedures that you put in place become the Bible of your law firm, so that they come down to all the new starters, and that will help you to avoid and minimize any risks. And the thing is, though, we are human, and risks are inevitably likely to happen. So what you've got to do is make sure you report those risks, because that's the only way you're going to learn from your mistakes. And it's very important that so for example, a data protection breach occurs as a result of a cyber attack and information being stolen, potentially, and this has happened in America, where high-profile clients, and they include celebrities, the data was stolen, it was sold on the black market. They wanted sort of $20 million initially to begin with, and then they realized we can blackmail them for more, and it got to $42 million. High prices can be put on. They kind of, on a smaller scale, divert the calls, take your client list, take their personal information, divert the calls so they're not coming straight to your law firm anymore. It's a way of stealing clients as well. So at all levels, you've got to be vigilant. You've got to make sure that you are attending courses yourself, you're reading the Gazette, law gazettes, to ensure that you know what risks are on the market at the moment, to make sure that your systems and your processes are updated continuously. It's not a one-off process that you would do at the beginning of the life of the law firm. You've got to ensure maybe every 6 months that you are looking into this. And you've got to, as I say, ensure that your staff are not living in a blame culture, because, as I say, mistakes can happen. They should be able to put their hand up and say, I've made a mistake. And then it's for you to be able to ensure that you're in a position to minimize that mistake, minimize the risk, learn from that. And for example, in the UK, if there was a data protection issue, you would have to alert the ICO within 72 hours. And see, whichever jurisdiction you are in, it's very important that you know the timescales in which breaches must be reported, and to whom. Who is the body that you're reporting to? So all these are factors that need to be taken into consideration. Potentially, the risk that you have is if an employee is using their own laptop and logging into work emails or into work systems from their personal laptop, you don't know whether they're going onto illegal sites, you don't know what free software they're downloading, and you don't know what potential software is harming their equipment, and in turn would take over the files on your list. So these are some of the factors. As I say, we'll dive deeper into them as the conversation happens. But if anybody has any examples and they would like to share, we'd like to listen.
While we get the audience to think about an example, just on the last point you mentioned, I think it's critical, and we've seen that with the GDPR as well, because it's started to regulate, for instance, the bring your own device policy. So more and more the organizations are requested to provide for that. In my organization, I see it a lot because, sometimes we travel quite, I suppose, all lawyers have to travel. So there is a bit of IT, I would say constraint. In some countries, you don't necessarily have the support. So some people tend to use the device. And of course, with that come the risk. What I just wanted to come back on, and maybe Hossam, you can also, comment. For me, what I find really, really interesting is that the cybersecurity can be an incident, but I think, as you say, the impact we know is going to be critical. The likelihood is almost certain. And what I find very interesting is that the cybersecurity threat is as dangerous as the incident could be, because ultimately we know there is an incident once we've been notified of the incident, or when we have identified there is an incident. But what I mean is that very often we don't know that there has been an incident. And that's what I find very, very challenging, I suppose, in the environment we work for, where I have 14 central banks that are looking at us because we are a payment service provider organization or e-money issuer. And when you have 14 regulators, 14 financial intelligence authority with the same requirement that you mentioned about reporting a breach, or even monthly fraud register that have to be submitted within, if you have a suspicious activity, fraudulent activity, or a suspicious threat, it has to be immediately reported within 48 hours. For that, again, you can only comply with the obligation under the AML Act if you know that there has been an incident. So maybe, Hossam, you want to also comment on that?
Do you think the rules and the regulation which been established for cyber crimes are enough up to now in most of the countries? From my view, I don't think up to now. Because as we understand that the hackers always is so intelligent guy, we are dealing with a different criminal view. We are not dealing with a barbarian, illiterating, and understanding guy who is angry or something like that. No, we are dealing with someone who have intelligent cultures, who knows what he's doing. He have a huge level of object to which he's targeting, what he looking for. So you are not dealing with someone like the old days of criminals, which we used to have it with our fathers' days, So this technology created a new life, virtual life, which become mostly our lives nowadays. So the rules which been established, which keep it as updated and keep it up to coming, let's say, to re-regulate it as they are trying. They couldn't up to now stop it or try to protect it. Why? First of all, because of the cost of being spending for the hackers, because it's being covered by government for government. Same like what we are asking, for example. The same thing, the paper which been issued by Russia against America. How they get it as a hacking, and how they was hacking them for 6 months. Similar, because the government against governments. But you cannot regulate it. It's a smartness. Second thing, the cost of defending. You never been costing and attacking. The cost always in the defense, and how you create the security purpose for that. You got it? So, and how to defend or how to handle that issue is depending on the objective of the target. So there is a white collar hacking, which is just to show that he can reach to you. He didn't do anything. And there is a white hacking calls, which always showing you what is the defects, but he never attack you. That's kind. But there is a different attacking in different views for government, for example, for defamations, for bankruptcies, for creating damages, for personal data, for exposing some data against some data. So cyber crimes is intelligent wheel of ocean, which we cannot be in control regardless how long you are trying to manage it. That's why it was, as a part of it, when we discussed the session in the beginning of data protection or data localizations lead to data protection, then leading to security, which leading again to the same circle of cybersecurity or cyber crimes, which have to have the same circles which we are looking for. That's which we had to handle it all the day. Yeah. So it's not a small criminal which you can find it, and it's not even easy to find it because it can be attacking from different countries. I have an experience with someone from a different agent. It was an agent which was the top security agent in one of the countries. He couldn't stop the attack coming from different European country.
Yeah, and I think you see that's exactly what I was saying. The challenge is that on the one hand you have the obligation to report an incident, but on the second hand, the immediate I would say action as an organization. And again, I speak as a business. I suppose you guys will comment as law firm. But as a business, you have that obligation to report while you are actually investigating the incident. So you're still trying to understand what the root cause analysis is, what has triggered it, if there is actually continuous breach, perhaps, because perhaps there are continuous breach and there is exposure, and at the same time you still have to be able to report. So it is extremely interesting, I suppose. I can see Sebina wants to comment. Please go.
I absolutely agree. And what I would say there is the way to possibly mitigate that risk would be to ensure if staff are using their own devices for work, which includes mobiles as well as laptops, would be to ensure that you have the two-factor authentication in place, you have VPN in place, so that they can only access your work and your files via a VPN if they are using their own devices. So it's just showing that you've taken those mitigation steps to minimize the risk, control the risk, record the risk, and to ensure that that same issue doesn't happen again, because this is a growing area. The hackers, the hacktivists, are always going to be steps ahead because they are creating the technology and they are then in a position to put their virus out and hack you quicker than you can prevent yourself from being protected, which is unfortunate. But you've got to be sure that your software developers, your hardware manufacturers, everyone is on board. And I appreciate the smaller firms would not have separate IT departments, but it's very, very important that you do then educate yourself in IT and in this area of IT with regards to software and hardware and how potentially you can prevent someone entering your system, taking data. Because as lawyers, ethically, we've got to ensure that we keep client data secure. And we've got to be sure that the trust that we build with them from day one, from the day they sign the retainer, is there up until the day that the case is closed. And potentially you want the clients to come back to you in the future as well. So having a budget, setting aside a budget annually for data protection and for cyber attacks is a very sensible way forward, and it's not something that many law firms are considering. But it's word that we need to spread. People need to be aware. People need to be more vigilant, and the only way that you can get the message across is by discussing it, talking about it, and ensuring that everyone does understand the severity of this and the actions of what's happening behind in the dark sort of web world, which I fully don't understand. But I do try to go on as many training courses and read the Gazette for things that have happened in other law firms and learn from their mistakes, because sometimes it's difficult to go on courses. I try to do online courses instead of leaving the workplace. So it's just finding a fine balance. And I'm not sure if anyone has done any good courses recently, and if they have, I'd love for you to share the details with me as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
And how do and you can only mitigate through systems and controls and those kind of typical elements. How do you train the staff? How do you keep that vigilance, and how do you make them take ownership of the data and inform them of the risk? I'm sure there's a lot going on in that space.
There is, Mona, and it's developing a culture within the firm which everyone follows and understands, and that starts with having the right policies and procedures in place, and ensuring that those policies and procedures are reiterated time and time again, and that the staff are sent on training courses regularly. And as I say, it's not one whole section that you would cover in one go. It has to be bite-sized chunks. So you've got to ensure that you have, for example, mandatory courses. As soon as a member of staff starts, you say you have to do A, B, C, D, and until they don't complete all of this, and you give them a time frame, it has to be done within this time frame. And once the course is done, then a refresher. So maybe a bite size of what they've already done. Maybe 3 or 4 months later, you ask them to do the bite size. So now you must do this, it's mandatory. The minute you say mandatory to a member of staff, they think, oh, I have to do this, otherwise I'm in trouble. So it's just to make sure that the mind is refreshed continuously, and that so if they spot another member of staff doing those mistakes or carrying out conduct which shouldn't be, which is against your policies and processes, then ensuring that staff amongst themselves help to train one another as well.
I think maybe I'll just add 1 or 2 points. Sabina, thank you. I agree entirely with you with the mandatory training. I think it's critical. Of course, it has to be annually, and as you say, every new joiner. What I think perhaps we also consider, which from my perspective, because I look at the incident or threat from an insider and also outsider, and I suppose it's simply because of again the environment that we operate in. And think about a bank. There is so many threats that come from anywhere, as Hossam was saying. So not only it has to be for the employees, but it has to be with any third party you're actually contracting with. Yeah. So any third party it's a little bit like the ABAC or the ethics and compliance type of kind of conduct we used to implement a few years back with the UK Bribery Act. So very similar. So you have to make sure that contractually every third party that you're actually dealing either directly or indirectly with has that same obligation in terms of abiding to the security policy. That is one. The second is that we make sure that we send every single operation has an IT delegation. So not only a local IT team, but there is also a delegation that are specialized or specialists, sorry. My French accent is coming out, that are being sent to country very often, so they can actually supervise and also make sure that there is no disconnect between what the policy says and what the practice actually is,
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's about where you store your data. So now we have iCloud, a storage facility, which is great because you are safe, potentially more safer than you were if you're storing internally, and you can have the size of your cloud can be huge, and it is cost effective to have it that way. But the only problem that you would face is if you don't have access to internet because it's with a third party, you can't have access to your data. So that's the downfall. Whereas if it's on your internal server, although you have direct access, the problem is that you are more likely to be open to an attack. And so you've got to have a balancing act at the same time as well. And small things like e-signatures. Is when the document's sent onto onto a platform such as DocuSign, what happens to that document? So you upload it, the other clients, the other party signs it, it comes back to you. At that point, you've got to decide: do I take that document off DocuSign completely and store it on my own server, or do I leave it on the DocuSign as a repository? Do you actually want to leave it on there, and how secure is it? Because going back to earlier session, GDPR, we do not know where DocuSign, for example, have the main server. Which country is it in? And if you're leaving all your documents on there, and going on to on a topic which is not really related, but if it's got export control markings on there, and potentially there's a breach of your license as a result, you're in trouble in a different direction completely. So it leads into a more of a web where a lot more discussion can grow from this. But we're open to this panel discussion for that reason. So let's keep it going.
Yeah, I just have one further question. Sorry, just from a practical perspective, from a bank perspective, because you're regulated by multitude of central banks. So what have you found the attitude of the central banks in terms of these breaches? I mean, 48 hours. I mean, let alone investigation. I mean, getting notice. First of all, you're hoping somebody will notify you, and then once they've notified you, you've got to do your internal investigation, presumably, and then subsequent to that, you can do the reporting, which is often, requires a lot of substantiation, etc. Right? So, how have you seen the attitudes of the central banks, towards service providers such as yourself, deal with data?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very good question. I think, of course, the challenge is that the timeline is extremely strict in terms of reporting, and it depends on the jurisdiction. So just to give you some perspective, I suppose, for instance, in Zambia, you have 48 hours, as I said earlier, from the moment that the occurrence of the suspicious activity. So again, you have to know about it. in some kind, and you have to report to the Financial Intelligence Authority, and then the Financial Intelligence Authority has 48 hours to then report to the central bank. So it's like a chain of escalation. In other countries, like for instance in Francophone, in Gabon, Congo, and Chad, then you would have 48 hours to report, and then you have another 5 days to provide actually a detailed explanation of what happened. Practically, that is the theory again. Practically speaking, of course, what happened very often is that we have a constant engagement with the regulator. Unfortunately, we had, incident. I mean, it's like a bank. It's normal. Fraud happens. Incident happens. It's part of the game. When it does happen, the first thing which is critical is that you make sure your regulator knows about it from you and not from anyone else. And you can actually try to mitigate the damage, because besides the reputational damage from I would say the entire public or third party you're actually servicing, then of course you have the risk of getting a fine because you're in breach of obligation. And then the what parts, maybe you guys can react or give me your angle, or you want to react to that?
Yeah, I want to add one point
Sure.
on that. Usually in our client, which we had an experience with them, I would advise them usually to go to a cybersecurity company. See, whatever regarding the process which been taken by the government or by the central bank, it's already been done. The criminal was done, because any criminal, including 3 elements and the motivation. The criminal and the crime will include the criminal and the victim and the crime scene. Here you cannot do anything, even if you report. There is nothing will be reverted, because most of the people who reported similar strategy, in the end they lost the money. So usually we are advising them, they have to communicate directly with the hostage. 60 to 80% as analysis up to now, they are paying the ransom if they have to. And they are communicating with the company of cybersecurity company, which is trying as an urgent process, forget about the process, to try to figure out from where that attack is came. If they can figure out the IP of that at the hacking, if they can communicate with him in the end, if they try to solve the problem, because in the end you cannot give an answer of yes or no, but you have to solve it in urgent way, else your data will be exposed, which will create a damage, or your website will be stopped. For example, if you are an Amazon or bigger shipping companies or something like that, or your reputation will be reframed in the market. So usually we forget about, that's why I told you, even the regulation which been established it's similar, it's like a political more than it's forbidden as law, because in the end it's a fight between government to governments, to be honest.
Very interesting. And one I would say trend I've noted, and perhaps you guys, if you've had that experience in your respective organization, but one trend I've noticed with the business is that they react in a panic mode. And when we are trying to, I suppose as lawyer, we try to look at things with a bit of calm and thinking, okay, we still have to manage the fire while there is a fire. But the business are acting like sometimes extremely unreasonably, and then they will start, suspending services. They will start raising claims against, perhaps the platform provider, because they believe that the mistake come from there without having even the full investigation. So that's one thing which I believe is extremely challenging, because you not only have the fire from the outside environment, but you also have to manage the risk of creating even more damage internally, because people actually don't know how to react. And I think to Sebina's point, I agree with you. For me, it's a question of awareness, because very often the person don't understand the impact that can have on an organization, or even on a bigger, I would say, a bigger society if there is a personal data breach. And yeah, I think it's still a big challenge.
It is, absolutely. You need to know what your vulnerabilities are. If you don't know where you are vulnerable, then how do you mitigate a risk? And that's what it comes down to. Having a panic attack in the middle of an episode is not the right strategy to take. I mean, it's the obvious one. I possibly would have a panic attack, but try to keep it calm and pop it under the carpet so no one else sees what I'm going through internally. But it's human nature, and we do panic. But at the same time, I also know I've read about, or I've heard about, or I've seen X, Y, Z, so therefore I need to make sure this does not happen to me. And this is why it's so crucial that you do go out yourself and you carry out that investigation, and that you know exactly who to report to and who to go to for help. So as I said earlier, your software person, your manufacturer for the hardware, any person that's involved, any IT person, you've got to be sure that they are not the only ones that are keeping the information to themselves, that they are spreading it across the entire organization or the firm or the business, wherever you are, to be sure that those that are non-technically aligned also understand the severity, understand what to do, and they know who the go-to person is. And that's all covered in your policies and procedures. And you can't just write your policies and procedures once. The banks will have their policies and procedures, firms will have theirs, businesses will have theirs, organizations will have theirs. They will not be the same, but there will be some overlap, crossover at some point. And you've just got to be sure that you keep those policies and procedures updated yourself. You can't just bring out a manual from 10 years ago and say, oh, here's my policy, my procedure, please do read this. It's not aligned, it's not relevant. So much has happened since then. Or, something that's just happened last year, maybe something more has happened since then. How have you addressed it within your policies and procedures? Are you actually ensuring that all those documents are being updated each time? God forbid you have breaches often, but each time a breach happens, are your policies and procedures being aligned with that? So you're learning from your mistakes at the same time and teaching your staff. Have the staff come across something that they might need to teach you? Are you listening? At the end of the day, it's not just about you being the learned one. You've also got to give everyone else in the business a chance, because a business is only successful so long as everyone holds hands together and brings something to the table. So you can't just pigeonhole people and say, I'm the only one that makes decisions at the board table. You've got to give everyone that opportunity. And to run a business successfully, it's the only way to be a good leader. And leadership is by getting everyone inclusive, everyone involved, and listening and allowing employees to be heard and giving them that respect. So to be respected, you've got to first give respect, which is very, very important. And it's all about mindset. As long as you've got the right leadership, strategies, tools, then potentially together you can minimize risk. It's not going to be 100%, but try to make it 70, 80, 90%. You're winning. If you do that, you are winning.
I just have one, maybe that's a controversy. Sorry, Sebina, I suppose that's the part of the debate. But I was just thinking while you're speaking, I agree, of course, with you, with the fact that we need to train. I mean, we need to do everything we have as an organization to make sure the guys are aware of the policy terms. What I suppose I feel a little sensitive to some extent is the fact that, let's talk about financial loss, okay? Because ultimately that's what it is about. If there is a cybersecurity incident, then it will trigger financial loss for the company, for the client, for whoever. Those can be really, really adverse and extremely significant. So now the issue that we face once again is that you can try to claim, from an insurance, if you have, for instance, let's say infidelity of employee, if you have a cybercrime, that is fine. But the issue is that if anyone has been negligent in an organization, including the same employee that have actually been trained, and they know and they've agreed and signed to the policy, but they've been negligent, and if it's a gross negligence, the insurance will simply not be able to cater for it. So you see, that's one of the I suppose challenge we face, because at some point you need some consequences as well. You need to also send a message, I think, to some extent, so then the employees take it very seriously, because the financial loss is going to be adverse to the organization, but not to the person, if you think about it. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree. If it's gross misconduct on behalf of employees, so they've potentially done it out of malice, and it could be for any reason at all, they are just firing shots at you, which is not a nice situation to be in, then you've got to be sure that you get your policies in place, the insurance policies, and pay that extra premium so that you're covered in any aspect. So if there is a negligent situation within your law firm, potentially you're looking for a policy that will cover you for everything. Whether such a policy exists, I wouldn't know. It's different in every jurisdiction. But I agree with what you're saying. It's right. The employees can potentially do this just to challenge you, just to cause harm to you. Maybe they might have intention to leave, or they might just be aggrieved by something that's happened, and it's their way of coming back to you somehow. But this is why it's so important that when they are using their own devices, because more than likely these things happen after work hours, not during work, and potentially happen on their own devices, not on work devices. So you've got to be sure that you have those restrictions in place. VPN, they can only access through the work through the VPN. that you have two-factor authentication so that you have an audit trail, who's logged onto the system when, and you've got to be sure that the passwords are changed regularly, that they are strong passwords, not weak. So you know, these are important points that you should note, particularly if you have your own setup, own firm, and you have people working for you. You must always cover yourself however you can. Just before we wrap up, would you like to touch upon crypto? We had a very, very brief discussion about the regulation. We finished? Time's up, okay. Oh, we can have an interaction session during drinks.
Break.
Any questions from, or any points to be added?
Hi. Y'all, really gave a very valuable insight, and it was quite informative. Thank you so much at the outside. I was just wondering about drone jacking, which I think is a new wave when it comes to cybersecurity. And as you said, he says still the laws are yet to be built and yet to be fortified. So it's not a question, but probably we could take up the next DIGITALCONFEX probably. But I was just wondering about, drone jacking, because I guess there's already an incident that has taken place around here. So in case it's possible, if you could throw light on that, or maybe we could take it up at the next DIGITALCONFEX probably. But yes, I must admit that laws are being fortified yet, and however egregious it might seem, the cybersecurity threat and the harm, it is egregious in nature, but still we are improving, I guess. We are still building upon, and I'm not quite sure whether we can reach that stage to be, completely protect ourselves from cyber threats or cybersecurity threats. And as you said, criminals, they are quite smart enough. You don't require to be intellectuals to be a criminal. A criminal mindset is a criminal mindset. And when it comes to cybersecurity, again, the attack is always there, and egregious as it is always.
Yeah, you are true. First, thank you for your input. But let me complete it from yours. As I'm acknowledging from other laws in other countries and other regions, to be honest, let's agree about to be fair in the other side. First of all, let's understand that we are facing a unique and a new challenges and the new risks, which is considered a threat for us. And UAE and some other countries consider are the first or the top countries which start to regulate the rules to start to face those. We always know in the rules there is established of 10 to 15 years for that rule to be in the place where you can use it as an effective law. That's usually happening in any country. So let's say, yeah, I understand the Jax, which you are speaking about, the incident which you talk about it. We can speak about that in any other incident. But yeah, but at least in the other ways, the government trying from their best waves of regulations. But in this new risks and new threats, it's always jointly protection have to be there. Individual have to be interfered now. You cannot be watching and considering the government or the bank or the central bank or the federal laws will help you. Because anyway, the risk is so fast, so permanent, you cannot find out the criminal, you cannot find out who did it. It's so responded. If you didn't, then you lose your chances. You will, whether he posts the data, he posts the photos, or he will close off. So you have to respond to that, or you have to be in the level of high level of protection, to attack, to defend yourself in this such attack, which will cost, of course, a lot of money for you to reach that level. It's not an easy. But thanks for your input. Yeah.
Thank you.